Hi guys, welcome back. In this video we're going to be introducing shadow and duality types, and we're also going to be discussing the 8-function model as well as understanding the shadow SWOTs. So if you remember from the previous video, we were talking about the Jungian cognitive function stack of a personality type which contains 4 SWOTs. And here we're going to expand this to all 8 SWOTs. But first let's discuss a bit about this model. So the 8 SWOT model was first introduced by, I think, John Beebe, who was trying to integrate all 8 functions inside a personality type. So personally, I haven't found enough use of the 8-function model to integrate it and to consider a personality type containing all 8 functions. We will see this very clearly when we start doing specific typings of people, especially with some visual typing things. So for us, we're still going to keep the stand that a personality type contains only 4 functions. So this is the personality type here. But there's some useful information that can come from an 8-function model. So we're going to just look at it briefly here. And we're also going to check about shadow type and duality type, which come from that. So first of all, we have here as an example the ENFP personality type. So the ENFP has NE, FI, TE, SI in their cognitive function stack. And now what are the 4 missing functions? Well, the 4 missing functions are just every natural process here with the opposite orientation. So for extroverted intuition, it means that introverted intuition is missing, and so on and so forth for the other 3 functions. And how do we order them? Well, we can go through in order. So since extroverted intuition is the first one, we can say that the 5th one is introverted intuition, and then the second one is introverted feeling. So the 6th one here is going to be extroverted feeling, and so on until the end. So this is one way to introduce the other 8 functions, and this is the way that we're going to explore here. Also keep in mind that last time we discussed that the personality types functions are ordered in terms of strength, with the top one being the strongest and the 4th one being the weakest. Well, now we can consider this continuing all the way down to the last function. So if we consider all 8 SWOTs, this means that the first one is the strongest and the second one is not the second one, but the last one is actually extremely weak. Another thing we can do is we can consider that this is the conscious part of the personality, and then all of this below this line, so the 4 functions that are missing, are part of the unconscious for the specific personality type. Now, what are these SWOTs called? So what we're going to call this SWOT. So for the 5th SWOT, we can call it either opposite or nemesis. And the idea of this SWOT is that it usually is an attractor for the type. So since the type is using extroverted intuition, the introverted intuition is the same kind of process, right? It's again an intuition process, but it's different in orientation. So usually the extroverted intuition is actually attracted to the introverted intuition because it is interested in this kind of process that is it seems very familiar to it, but at the same time is extremely different. So you can say that the 5th SWOT is kind of an opposite, but as well as it can create attraction. So this is the idea behind the 5th SWOT. So the 6th SWOT usually is called a critic. So what we can say about this SWOT is that a personality type has second SWOT FI in this scenario, the NFP. So they're going to be very critical towards this function. So they're going to seek people who have very well developed FE, because if you look at the ENFP with the second SWOT FI, so they're going to be extremely interested in their own personal values and keeping harmony. But keeping harmony part is mostly, so they already have their values. They don't want anyone else to actually stamp on their values or make them change their values significantly. And this is why they're going to be seeking a person who is able to accommodate them very well, which is very prominent for a person who has extroverted feeling. Now the 7th SWOT is going to be called actually a trickster. You can also call it blind spot. So this function here has a very interesting role in the sense that it is extremely weak, but the person is aware of it. So I would have to say that for each personality type, the weakest function is, first of all, it is the 4th function, as we discussed before. But at the same time, the 7th SWOT is also extremely weak. So the 4th and the 7th are really the weak ones. But the difference is that the 4th SWOT, you actually have some conscious control over it, and you're able to work on it. It can be aspirational, but the 7th SWOT is actually pretty terrible. And not only is it you're very bad at it, but also you don't even want to develop it. This is how this is the difference between the 4th and the 7th SWOT. So this is the last function that impacts you very negatively, and you don't even want to go through it. I mean, it isn't very interesting for you to go through this function. If you are the ENFP, for example, this is the TI function. And the last SWOT is going to be called actually demon. So for this function, the difference between the 7th and the 8th is that the 8th SWOT you're not even aware. So you're really bad at this, but you're not even aware that you're bad. So it is something that is on the lowest spectrum of your awareness. And usually you don't even register this function at all. So this is the 8th SWOT function. Now, another thing you can notice here is that if you look at all the 4 SWOTs, actually there is a type, another type who is representative by this exact sequence of functions. And in this scenario, this type is actually the INFJ type. Okay. And now, so we discussed the shadow SWOTs, and now this type is the INFJ. And what's the dynamic behind the ENFP and INFJ? So this is what we will call opposite or shadow types. I like to use the term shadow because opposite, we will introduce duality type later, and opposite and duality sound very similar. So I would refer to this type as a shadow type. And the ENFP's shadow type is the INFJ when constructed in this specific way we discussed here. So for each SWOT of the ENFP, you just take the same kind of sequence of processes. So it's intuition, feeling, thinking, and sensing. But the orientation becomes opposite, and this is how you construct the duality type. By the way, if you go in the reverse direction, the INFJ as well has the duality type of ENFP, so it's both ways. And now, what is the significance of the duality type? Usually, the relationship between a duality type and its other duality type, so between the two, is very interesting in terms of, if you look at this, you remember last video, we discussed that the personality type's temperament is determined by the first 2 SWOTs, first 2 functions. And you can see here for the ENFP, they're part of the NF personality type because they have intuition and feeling. And if you look at the INFJ, actually they have the same kind of temperament, right? Because they're also using intuition and feeling. So in some sense, you can say that those types are extremely similar because they use the same kind of processes, and the temperament is the same, right? But since the orientation is different, right? ENFP is using extroverted intuition while the INFJ is using introverted intuition. They are actually quite different as well. So it creates this interesting dynamic where they might be attracted to each other since they have the same temperament, they have very common ground between them and things to discuss, and they might have similar interests as well, but they look at the same thing in a different way, and it might be said it is a complementary way since they're looking with a different orientation on the same thing. So you can say that this is kind of the dynamic between the shadow type and the personality type. Another thing you can do actually is, if you look at the personality type stack, what you can try and do is you can try to reverse it, right? So what happens if you start from the 4th function and go up? So we can try it here. So if you do it like this, you have the introverted sensing first, you have extroverted thinking, and then you have introverted feeling, and the last SWOT you have extroverted intuition. And if you've paid attention, this actually is another type. So this type is called the ISTJ. And what we'll call this type is, this is going to be the duality type. So you can see how different this is from the shadow type. And what's the relation between the personality type and its duality type? Well, it's very interesting because the personality type in of itself has this weak 4th function, right? This is the function that is giving them the most trouble throughout their life, but they still have the ability to develop this. And if you look at the ISTJ, it's actually extremely strong. It is the strongest function for him. So what can happen in this scenario is that, first of all, I've seen a very competitive environment being born by this. So the ENFP, and also it's the opposite also true. So the weak part of the ISTJ is the strong part of the ENFP. So you can see that they're using also the same process, exactly the same functions, but just in the opposite direction. So this creates this dynamic where the types are similar in some sense, but then extremely different in another sense, where the weakness of one is actually the strength of another, and vice versa. And I would say it's very interesting to look at your duality type in terms of the ability for you to develop yourself. So when you have this weak fourth function, you look at how one who is strong in this fourth function is using it. So this can help you actually develop yourself very well. So this is an opportunity for growth if you explore your duality type. But at the same time, if you're not very open-minded, you might see those people as using too much of those functions, or you're not able to understand the purpose of their actions because you're very weak at whatever they're doing. But I think the best approach here is going to be just to explore your duality type and understand what they're doing great, so you can integrate it within your own life as well. And I think for this video that's all. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.